Hello everybody and welcome back for another instalment of Teach Me in 10, the video series that is brought to you by LabTube, part of the Technology Networks group. Here at Teach Me in 10, we ask scientists to talk to us about a scientific research area or a scientific concept in less than 10 minutes. Our guest for today's instalment of Teach Me in 10 is the renowned Professor Robert Langer. Professor Langer is one of 11 Institute Professors at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's written over 1,500 papers and has over 1,400 issued or pending patents worldwide. Professor Langer's patents have been licensed or sub-licensed to pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies across the world, and he is the most highly cited engineer of all history. Today, Professor Langer is going to talk to us about materials for drug delivery.
Hi, my name's Bob Langer. I'd like to tell you about some of the things we're doing and are involved in with respect to creating new materials and what they can do in medicine. One area in particular that we've done a lot of work on and that I think is I hope, quite important is the idea of using materials to deliver new medicines to people. I thought I'd give you an example of that to start out, and that is actually the COVID vaccine. One of the companies I co-founded is a company called Moderna, and they've made new vaccines out of what's called messenger RNA. And the idea is that you want to give messenger RNA to a patient, and this is a new way of creating antibodies for the patient that could attack the COVID virus. Now, the thing is that if you gave messenger RNA directly to the patient, it'll be destroyed. It won't work. So what's done is to put it in what are called little nanoparticles. And actually nanotechnology is a big aspect of drug delivery systems and biomaterials. So you put it in little nanoparticles, and that protects the messenger RNA from being destroyed by the body. And it actually helps get it into cells where it will start to make the vaccine. So that's, I think, a really important area that's going to permit all kinds of new medical therapies. And by the way, messenger RNA is not only, I think, going to be useful for new vaccines like COVID, but many other vaccines, like, for example, flu someday and others, and also for new medical therapies. It's actually in clinical trials now for new treatments for cancer and for heart disease. But the idea of using materials for drug delivery, which is a relatively new area, probably starting in the late 60s and early 70s, it really permits all kinds of therapies that you may or may not realize. For example, before people use these kinds of what are called controlled drug delivery systems, you'd swallow a pill and the blood levels of that drug would go way up and then they'd come down. So first you'd have to remember to take it later, take it again, and a lot of people don't remember. Secondly, when it goes way up, it can cause side effects, and when it goes way down, it may not even be effective. But when you put it in the materials can actually control how fast it gets out and actually deliver at a constant rate and for really long times, like days if you swallowed a pill, maybe years if you injected it into the body. And these are actually used in all kinds of therapies. For example, there's pills that treat heart disease that you can swallow like this, and they keep the drug at a very steady level. And there's implants that people use, like what are called drug-eluting stents. And those drug-eluting stents are probably one of the most common ways of treating heart disease. And the idea of a drug-eluting stent, for example, is you have something like a Chinese finger puzzle. And you put that in the patient to open up the blood vessel of the patient who has heart disease. The problem is the process of putting the stent in itself and the stent can cause certain cells in the blood vessel, like smooth muscle cells, to start to proliferate, and they'll close off the blood vessel maybe in a few months, and that could cause the patient to die. So what's done is you actually coat this stent, the Chinese finger puzzle looking thing, and you coat it with a material, and then you put a drug in, like Taxol, an anti-cancer drug, and normally if you gave it to the patient at high levels, it might kill them. But now it's delivered locally right to the vessel, which is 1/1000th the dose, but it keeps the blood vessel open. So these are some of the things that already exist and that are really helping, millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world. And there are lots of others too that are important. People may have seen transdermal patches that you can put on your skin, and when you do that, that also can deliver drugs to treat heart disease and prevent cigarette smoking and other problems for really long times. There are new aerosols that people are giving, new nasal sprays, all kinds of things that are used to treat just about any kind of disease. For opioid addiction, again, there are little microspheres that you can inject in the body that deliver things that can prevent people from being addicted to opioids for a month, in some cases even 6 months, and then you just give another injection. So these are some of the ideas that are taking place in the area of drug delivery. There's a tremendous amount of science involved because it involves creating new materials, it involves figuring out how to make new nanoparticles, and so there are many different things that it ends up being important in. So drug delivery systems, what are called controlled drug delivery systems, that's one area that's really a great example of how materials can be used in medicine. A second area that we've been very involved in is what's called tissue engineering. Myself and one of my colleagues, Jay Vacanti, who was at Mass General Hospital, worked out a way a number of years ago where we could make materials in a three-dimensional form and then add certain types of cells, which could be stem cells that you've heard of perhaps, or other kinds of cells. And by doing so, we've developed strategies where you can make new tissues and organs. Now, this is at a very early stage, but already people have made new skin this way for treating burn victims and for people who have diabetic skin ulcers. Now, we're also, various groups are in clinical trials to use this kind of approach to make new blood vessels, to repair spinal cords, to treat diabetes and many other diseases. In fact, one of the interesting things is that people have thought about using this in areas that are very, very different than just medicine. For example, one of my students has started a company in Israel to make new meat this way. There's a company in New York City that's making new leather this way, called Modern Meadow. So it's been really interesting to see the different applications that can be used and that people come up with. In fact, another thing that we've been involved in with one of my colleagues, Jeff Karp, he was a postdoc of mine and now a professor at Harvard, is not only could you take cells to do this, but cells make certain molecules that could be activate what are called progenitor cells. And progenitor cells are sort of the precursor to cells that could do very important things. One of the things that's already in clinical trials is using these molecules that we found to cause the proliferation of hair cells in the ear. So there's a company, some of my other students started, called Frequency Therapeutics, that's actually in clinical trials to help people who can't hear again. So that's another example which came out of this whole area of tissue engineering. And there are obviously others too. It's again, like I say, at a very early stage, but there's a lot of research going on that I hope will help patients someday. There are many, many challenges in these areas. And if one looks at it from a material standpoint, classically materials that people used in medicine were not designed for medicine. For example, in the artificial heart, what happened is people wanted to make a heart, and this goes back to the 1960s, and they asked, well, what object has a good flex life like a heart? So they picked a lady's girdle, and they made the artificial heart out of that. But that, even though it had some promise, also caused problems, because when blood hits the surface of the artificial heart, the lady's girdle material, it's an unnatural substance in the body, so it formed a clot. The clot would go to the patient's brain, they'd get a stroke, and they may die. Breast implants, one of those was originally a mattress stuffing, and now companies are making much, much better materials. So one of the things that our lab has done over the years is, rather than take materials from your house, we've asked the question, what do you really want in a medical material from an engineering standpoint, chemistry standpoint, biology standpoint, and then synthesize them for first principles. And that's led to all kinds of new materials that in many cases are safer and can do things that couldn't be done before. One of them that we did with Henry Brem led to a new treatment for brain cancer called Gliadel. We created a family of plastics called polyanhydrides, and that ended up being used now the last 25 years for new treatments for brain cancer. But there are many, many others too that we've been involved in that are going to hopefully enable new types of genetic therapies, as I mentioned, with the COVID vaccine, as well as other medical therapies as well. So I think the whole area of materials is incredibly important for medicine. It's been important in the past, and I think it will be even more important in the future. Thank you so much for listening to me, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak to you. Thanks so much.
We would like to say a huge thank you to Professor Robert Langer for joining us here at Teach Me in 10 and for delivering such an incredible presentation with some really insightful points. If you'd like to learn more about Professor Langer's research, check out the video description below the video. We'll be back next week for another instalment of Teach Me in 10, but if you can't wait until then, make sure you check out the Teach Me in 10 hub page where you can find all the videos that we've published so far. Or if you're on Facebook, be sure to like our Facebook page, Teach Me in 10. See you soon.